Hello and welcome. I'm John Butler, Investment Director at Southbank Investment Research, and I'm joined today by my friend, former colleague, and prominent financial commentator, Alasdair Macleod. Alasdair has been writing about financial market developments for many years, including at Gold Money, where we were both colleagues for about 5 years. Alasdair has some very fascinating, historically informed views on just where the international financial markets and money itself is going to be evolving in the coming years. And so I'm so pleased that he's been able to join us today. Welcome, Alasdair.
Thank you very much for having me, John. It's nice to be back in touch.
Yes, very nice indeed. I'd like to begin our discussion with specific reference to your most recent article that you've posted to your Substack. You now maintain a Substack, which I think is great. It's a wonderful format for the type of content that you produce. And I have a hard copy of it with me here. And you talk about a range of geopolitical developments that you believe are going to be very prominent in the news and very much worth watching in the year 2024. And there's one of these in particular which, as you'll be well aware, I take a deep interest in myself, and I'm going to quote from it here. Russia has taken over the presidency of the BRICS, and in his New Year speech, President Putin stated that there will be over 200 meetings and events planned. The final definitive meeting will be in Kazan in October. It seems reasonable to assume that Russia will ensure that all current members will be educated towards the merits of adopting a gold-backed trade settlement arrangement instead of the dollar. The new currency is likely to replace the dollar as the intermediate step between non-dollar currency transactions. Could this be the year the dollar dies, is how you finish that section. That's quite a bold question to ask, and quite a bold idea in general regarding what might be happening. And yet, as you know, I've also given this some thought in recent years and written about it myself. Could you please elaborate for our viewers just how you see this happening, why it's happening, and what the implications are?
Yes, we've known for some time that Russia has been trying with China to reduce the use of the dollar within its sphere of influence. And we're talking about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, we're talking about the Eurasian Economic Union, and we're also talking about BRICS. Putting all these together, you've actually got the majority of the world by population, because it includes India, which is a very populous nation, and as well as that, the majority of the world by GDP. So this is a huge, great elephant in the Western room, which we're hardly aware actually is sitting behind us, as it were. And getting rid of the dollar was something which was heightened, if you like, as a priority when sanctions on SWIFT were imposed on Russia by, basically us, if you like, but led by America. That year, there was a big conference, a forum in St. Petersburg, which was attended by something like 84 different nations. And there, Putin made it quite clear that, get rid of your dollars, get rid of your euros, because the West, weaponizes them. And he also said, get your gold under your control. This was a message which I think was something like 14,000 delegates. I'm going back a couple of years, so my memory might be slightly faulty, but this was a well-attended event. And the only reason that, these countries, BRICS and potential BRICS, the global south, if you like, which it's now commonly termed, the only reason they haven't really rebelled against America is for fear of America, as it were. So they would rather not upset their arrangements, but you can see that they are generally drifting in the direction which is set by China and Russia. Now, the person who was appointed to come up with a new currency settlement system for the Eurasian Economic Union was a man called Sergei Glaziev, who's a very, very senior economist and economic advisor to President Putin. And he started talking about, the new currency replacing the dollar would be comprised of a basket of commodities and probably the currencies of the countries involved. But that is obviously far too cumbersome. And not only that, but if you get other countries joining this sort of snake arrangement, as it were, you have to rebalance the whole thing. I mean, it just wouldn't work. And it was quite clear that you drop the currencies, then start thinking about commodities. But actually, if you look at the price of commodities in fiat currencies and gold, it's clear that the best representation of a basket of commodities, which you never need to rebalance, is actually the gold. So pricing them in gold does make an awful lot of sense. The original paper, which was produced, it was in the form of a press release, was that the problem was the cost of doing transactions with the dollar being, if you like, the stepping stone between one currency and another. Just to make it clear for viewers, the way a foreign exchange transaction works between two foreign currencies is you sell foreign currency A to buy the dollar, you then sell the dollar to buy foreign currency B. Obviously, intergovernmental currency swaps and agreements don't do this. That's a lot more straightforward. But in the course of ordinary trade, you have to go through this motion, and it was that they wanted to get rid of. The second thing that then happened, and this was, I think, in 2022. Sergei Glaziev wrote a paper for a Moscow business magazine called Vedomosti. And in that, he started writing about why Russia should go on a gold standard. Now, this is the man who has been appointed by Putin to come up with some sort of alternative to the dollar for global trade. On my Substack, actually, if people want to join that, I mean, you can join for free. I mean, I'd love it if you pay, but you can join for free. I actually did publish a translation of that, and I think it's well worth looking at that just to see what the thinking is in Moscow. Now, we then had the August summit in Johannesburg last year, and at that summit, there was an agenda. And ahead of the summit, it was leaked by the Russian embassy in Nairobi and subsequently confirmed on RT that this currency would be on the agenda. With the benefit of hindsight, Russia was trying to push it onto the agenda, but actually failed because India objected. India, as a member of BRICS, it has to be unanimous. I mean, the idea was that the agenda has to be unanimously agreed amongst the BRIC members. But India kicked back on it, bearing in mind that India is very Keynesian in its attitude, and it would not want to upset the Americans anyway. The monetary side of India is very much in the British sphere of influence because the Bank of England always is consulted in the appointment of the governor of the Reserve Bank of India. So we're talking about overturning some very, very serious existing ties, and India was not ready for that. And in any event, I mean, as a state, they haven't got sufficient gold really to promote a sound money alternative to the rupee. And also China. China takes a far more evolutionary view of these things. China doesn't tend to, sort of, if you like, drive change, particularly when it comes to monetary and economic affairs. I mean, she will do her own thing, yes, but she's not going to start interfering in other people's business. Her view is very much, we've been around for 3,000 years, whatever, since Confucius, so I think it was about 500 BC in our calendar, and on that basis, we're going to be around for the next 3,000 years. So they take very much a longer-term view. Russia is different. Putin is in a hurry. So you can see this is where the tensions were. So this brings us to the current situation, where the new BRICS trade settlement currency didn't make the agenda. We now have Russia as chairman of BRICS, and they are now running the whole show. And this is, as you referred to in my article, this is why they have a very intense program of meetings, up over 200, according to Putin in his New Year's speech, including the final one in October. So we're going to see a lot of activity, and I guess that behind the scenes, Russia will be doing what it can also to help destabilize the dollar. So I think that is, if you like, the geopolitical situation that we face in 2024.
Well, it certainly is a fascinating one. You do list a handful of other developments which, in various ways, actually do overlap with that. In particular, some recent developments in the Middle East. And so moving a few pages through the article here, let me quote once again to bring that into the discussion. For the Gulf Cooperation Council, representing all the oil and gas producers in the Middle East, the West's climate change agenda has eliminated itself as a source of long-term energy demand. The GCC's future is now focusing on Asian markets dominated by industrializing China and India, who pay lip service to saving the planet but show no signs of reducing demand for fossil fuels. In partnership with China, Russia has played her energy cards well by reeling in the GCC to her sphere of influence. The reality so far, as the Western alliance is concerned, is that the outcome of any action against the Houthis or in Lebanon and Syria to protect Israel's northern flank will be determined by Russia and China deploying regional support. It is no longer a matter confined to just the Middle East. And that, to me, is where the overlap becomes clear. The entire international monetary system, Bretton Woods and post-Bretton Woods, has always been based around the idea that the United States, together with a handful of allies, could maintain peace and freedom of navigation throughout the oil and gas-producing regions of the Middle East. The dollar's reserve status has always, to some extent, implicitly relied on that Pax Americana regime. It seems all of that is now on the table for discussion amongst the BRICS, including those who have newly joined the alliance, and as you say, the SCO, and now the GCC. It's all coming to a head, isn't it, Alasdair?
Yes, that's certainly how I view this development, and the Middle Eastern problem is now rearing its ugly head. I think one point which must be understood is that the days of America's running the Middle East on the basis of divide and rule, in other words, it could attack, say, Iraq and find support from somewhere else within the Middle East. In other words, there was no coordinated Arab view as to what America's role should be, or, if you like, the Western Alliance's role should be. Now, that has fundamentally changed, and we saw that, really, with Mohammed bin Salman becoming, if you like, the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia. He doesn't mess around. It's quite extraordinary because he has turned around and said, it's no longer exclusively petrodollar. We're quite happy to accept other currencies in payment. And on top of that, we had a very clear signal. There was a G20 meeting, I think it was in Riyadh, where Putin attended. And as Putin came in, he sort of high-fived with Mohammed bin Salman, which clearly indicated they had some sort of agreement between them. Then, when was it? I think it was a bit over a year ago, you had Biden going over to meet Mohammed bin Salman at rather short notice. And it's not actually clear whether he actually got to meet Mohammed bin Salman. If he did, it was probably only for about half an hour or so. And the very next week, we saw President Xi arriving, and this was, they rolled out the red carpet, the whole caboodle. It was quite spectacular. The contrast could not be greater. And so what we're now seeing is we're seeing Saudi Arabia actually sharing interests with Iran. The Houthi thing, the Houthis have got no enemy anymore. They were fighting the Saudis. And now, of course, their paymasters are saying you've got to back off from the Saudis. But you've got these guys, who basically are guerrilla specialists. They're guerrillas. So they've now got another cause. And it so happens, it's very clever because we've all been sort of thinking, well, if you upset the Iranians, they'll close off Hormuz. But no, that is still in the background. What they have done, basically, is they have stopped the shipping going through the Red Sea by getting the Houthis to just, lob a few hand grenades and a few things at the at the ships in the straits there. Lloyd's Insurance has done the rest. It's just hiked up the rates, the insurance rates, which basically means you just can't go through Suez. Very, very clever. That's the way to do a proxy war. Note to the Americans in the Ukraine. So you can see that there's a fundamental change that has happened there. And from the other aspect, the Iranian involvement in this is very much coordinated through its membership of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which it joined in the middle of last year, and their discussions with Russia in particular as a fellow energy provider, but also China. Again, they're staying in the background in this one. But the Americans are perfectly aware of the implications of trying to attack anything Iranian, which is why they're in this sort of impasse and find that actually, if they act as they have done in the past, then this whole thing is just going to spiral out of control. It's a very, very concerning situation as far as the Western alliance is concerned. And unfortunately, the Israelis are effectively out of control. In the past, there's been a very, very close relationship between America and Israel. Not only politically, but also in terms of intelligence sharing and all the rest of it. But Israel has gone off on its own tack. And the next thing I expect we will see is an escalation of the situation on Israel's northern border. They're already threatening to invade North Lebanon, to take back, if you like, push the Houthis back. Not the Houthis, sorry, Hezbollah back. And that, that looks to me like that's going to be escalating. Unfortunately, this is sort of, I made the comparison in that article. It was rather like the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand in the Balkans just before the First World War, which triggered the First World War. We have a similar situation which could escalate rapidly out of control. The Western intelligence services, I think, are generally aware of this, and I think the Western political world is also very, very concerned. And, Secretary of State Blinken is sort of running around trying his best to try and get, the Israelis to back off from the sort of their genocidal tendencies over Gaza, without any success, really. So this is something that's developing. And at the same time, a cynic might argue that this gives cover for a withdrawal from the Ukraine, because it is clear that the Ukraine situation is a dead loss now. But the question is, how do we back out from it, having committed ourselves to supporting the Ukrainians? How do we do that without Putin appearing to have won, as it were? The thing that's becoming clear is that the army is no longer interested in this fight, the Ukrainian army. They are already talking at general-to-general level with the Russians. So the political class is being bypassed on this one. So the events are really getting out of our control in the Ukraine. So from America's point of view, the Biden presidency started with a very embarrassing retreat from Afghanistan, and it looks like ending with a very embarrassing retreat from the Ukraine, plus whatever might or might not happen in the Middle East. So, which incidentally, they're now calling Western Asia, which, sort of rather indicates, how these things are going. I think that this is going to be a major, major year for change in terms of American influence and the realization that America is no longer the world's policeman, which was a sort of role which they've cast for themselves. Big, big changes, John. I think really big changes. And this is something that has really got to be watched very, very closely.
Oh, I would agree with all of the above. That is, that you look at the very, very broad range of fault lines and flashpoints that have gone from cold to hot over the past year. I don't think any of that would have happened if there was still a general perception that the United States was still in a position to act as an effective global policeman. Again, Pax Americana is effectively over. The question now is how the U.S. is going to manage that decline. As you will know from the history books, of course, that you've studied throughout your life, the British Empire had to go through a very difficult period of adjustment following the world wars of the 20th century. And I think there might be some useful examples there of things that worked rather well and perhaps things that didn't work rather well. But one huge difference is that when that happened, sterling was no longer the global reserve and transactional invoicing currency. The dollar still is today. And so this period of adjustment is not merely going to be geopolitical, but as you make very clear in your article, it's also going to have international monetary and financial market implications. And so, moving a few more pages through, again, a very lengthy but deservedly so article, you do highlight why it is entirely logical that as the dollar's role declines along with Pax Americana, gold should take center stage in some way, and you offer the logic here. Logically, the neutrality of gold is an attractive replacement for the dollar in these trade transactions, with a gold substitute fully redeemable in gold and commercial bank credit created in its denomination, acting between currencies. Used for trade settlement, most credit created in the new currency becomes self-extinguishing. Furthermore, as a medium of exchange, it can be trusted to hold its value better than an unstable fiat dollar. Now, for our viewers who don't necessarily understand the importance of neutrality and self-extinguishing, could you please elaborate on those concepts and why they make gold such an outstanding international medium of exchange?
Yeah, well, let me start with the self-extinguishing nature of bank credit when it applies to trade finance. What I mean by that is that if you want to import something, say from Japan, then you need to have the funds in place so that you can import the goods from Japan. And you would go to the bank and you would arrange for something called trade finance. Now, as soon as the goods are delivered, then that finance is no longer required because the goods will be then passed on and sold. So the finance is specifically to finance the trade, the movement of goods from A to B. So that becomes self-extinguishing and as such is not inflationary. And that I think is the important point. With respect to gold, it should be understood that gold has, since the invention of money, pretty much been the internationally accepted medium of exchange for transactions. And this goes all the way back to Rome's 12 Tables, which was roughly 549 BC. And it was that got the Phoenicians actually to start in some of their cities to start issuing coins. I mean, the coins were very, very, lumpy, large, and all the rest of it. I think that the first Roman coin weighed about half a kilo or something, and it was base metal. But the thing settled down to gold, if you like, gold, silver, and also copper. But we're talking about gold here. And the point about this is that it was chosen basically by people as the means of settlement once they moved on from barter and just pure credit arrangements, if you like, to be settled in goods at a future date. Gold was then incorporated in Roman law. Over the next 1,000 years from the 12 Tables, various jurors ruled on the difference between money and credit, money being gold, and as the J.P. Morgan, John Pierpont Morgan said in testimony to Congress in 1912, gold is money and the rest is credit. The relationship between, goods held in custody and credit and all these things were all determined by these jurors and then summarized in Justinian's Pandex, which were 1,000 years after the original 12 Tables. And that in the Eastern Empire was confirmed in Greek in the Basilica, which was some 400 years after that. Now, the point is that out of the Roman Empire, both East and West empires, came all the European nations with Christianity, which based themselves on these Roman rulings. And we then colonized the world. So consequently, the whole of the world understands that gold is money and the rest is credit. And this also includes currencies. And the idea that the dollar is money is something that has only really been pushed by propaganda since the end of the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1971. So it is, if you like, the international standard. It is legal money, and not only that, but there is no counterparty risk. And we can all agree that. And even though China was not part of this, if you like, Judeo-Christian system of rulings on what is money and what is credit, they came to the same conclusion. And they were, in fact, we invented credit, as it were, bank credit, or banking in particular. The Chinese invented paper money, which was credit, if you like, for real money, which in China was probably a bit wider than just gold, silver. It also included precious stones and things of value that could be exchanged. So that is why gold is still international money which secures its value. And indeed, if you look at the value of assets measured in gold, you find that there is a constancy in price over long periods of time. I had a look, for example, at the housing market in the UK. And we've got statistics going back to about 1962. But if you look at the price of housing in London, measure it in gold, it's risen about 30% since 1962. Now, admittedly, you get a lot of use out of the roof over your own head, which you don't get use, out of a currency. And not only that, but you can leverage it up with credit. So, people have done extremely well on paper, as it were. But the important point is that the constancy of prices is so apparent in gold. And that is really what you want to secure in a currency.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of evidence for that. It's not just UK housing. I mean, you mentioned London specifically. If you look at the UK as a whole, there actually hasn't been a material national increase in house prices in gold terms in recent decades. If you then take a look at the global commodities market and take a look at gold versus oil, there's been very little movement in the gold-oil ratio through the decades, notwithstanding the occasional market noise and whatnot. But the trend has generally been one of stability and mean reversion. And so when you think about the role that money should serve in a society, that is to be the medium of exchange that provides the best intermediary between all of these price ratios, be they commodities, assets, houses, you name it, gold stands first and foremost in any reasonable historical comparison. However, those who run the printing presses, you and I both know, they are not going to simply willingly disarm themselves from the ability to print their way out of the next downturn, the next recession, or print their way through the next election. How are we going to get from here to there?
Well, time will tell, I think. Part of the problem is how long will it take for what I think we recognize in this discussion to be too much confidence in the value of credit represented by currencies. How long is it going to take for the general public, or let's say foreign owners of currencies, to actually hoist this message on board? I think there can be no doubt that Russia's move on this, with trying to move towards a more stable system, presumably based on gold, that I think will undermine the confidence in the dollar. And I would like to make a point at this juncture, and that is that the value of the dollar as a medium of exchange is a lot less dependent on the quantity of dollars in circulation or the amount of bank credit, or however you like to put it, than the confidence in its users that the value which it purports to represent is actually there. In other words, if we all decide at any one moment that we don't want dollars because of whatever reason, then it will be completely valueless. This is extremely important to understand because of the very large propensity of foreign ownership of dollars. We can see from the US Treasury tick figures that foreigners own, between deposits, Treasury bills, commercial bills, bonds and equities, a total of around about $32 to $33 trillion. Now, on top of that, you've got to look at this bit of the foreign exchange bit, derivatives, if you like, forwards and swaps and so on and so forth. And this incorporates those transactions where, you sell currency A to buy dollars in order to sell dollars to buy currency B. At any one time, there are off-balance sheet liabilities within the non-US banking system, which the Bank of International Settlements reckons is an additional $85 trillion, roughly. Now, this figure's a bit out of date, but, we'll just take it as a guideline. On top of that, those of us working in London are aware that there's a thing called the euro-dollar bond market. Those are basically bonds which are issued and financed outside the American banking system, which is why they're called euro, and that is a further $10 trillion. You put all this together, we are looking at around about $130 trillion of foreign interest in the currency, if you like, which is 4.5 times US GDP. This is a most enormous overhang, and to me, it has got the same characteristics of the crisis that led up to the failure of the London gold pool in 1960. I take that as, if you like, the comparison, rather than being driven off the gold standard, the Bretton Woods system, if you like, because that was the first sign of it, the failure of the London gold pool, when suddenly the combination of America and her European allies couldn't hold the relationship between gold and the dollar together. They just couldn't hold it together anymore, which is why it had to fail in 1971. So, this I think is a very important point. The amount of dollars overhanging the system is the other side of the Triffin dilemma when Triffin made his comments to Congress back in, I think it was in the 50s, he said that in order to create sufficient currency for a currency to act as a reserve currency, you need to run irresponsible monetary policies back at home. In other words, you've got to create the deficit so that the dollars can go abroad. But this inevitably, and this is the thing that people forget, the second part of the Triffin dilemma, inevitably this leads to a crisis at some stage. That is the crisis which I think we could be approaching in 2024.
Well, that is also the crisis that legendary French economist Jacques Rueff warned President Charles de Gaulle about when it was clear that the U.S. was indeed following this Triffin-esque policy into the 1960s. And it was under Rueff's advice that de Gaulle basically announced that at some point the gold pool that France was going to leave the gold pool and was no longer going to play that game because they saw where it was going. They did not believe it was in the French national interest. Now, the BRICS find themselves in a similar situation. The SCO membership finds itself in a similar situation, and the GCC finds itself in a similar situation. You have a majority of the world's countries, a majority of the world's population, and a majority of the world's energy and commodity producers all having a common interest in finding a way out of this inherently unstable crisis, almost requiring system. And 2024 may be the year that we start to see how that is going to be resolved one way or the other. And I think your article does as good a survey of where we're at and possibly where we're going as any I've read on the topic. So, Alasdair, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your work and your contributions. I've learned a lot from you over the years, and I hope our viewers have learned a lot from you over the course of this conversation. If they'd like to learn even more, can you please quickly direct them to your Substack where they can access more of your work?
Yes, sure. The Substack, it's the same name as my Twitter handle, which is @Macleod Finance. So it's Macleod Finance Substack, and you'll find me there. Also, my research gets published on Gold Money's website because I'm head of research at Gold Money, and I post a weekly market report at Gold Money. And until the end of this month, I'll be posting my long-form articles on Gold Money. After that, there will be a short form, if you like, of my longer articles, which you will find exclusively on my Substack. So those are the two areas to find me, and I hope that I can add value to people's lives by drawing their attention to monetary developments, the difference between money and credit, which we've discussed, and also the geopolitical forces, which are really beginning to matter, I think, even though the Western press, hardly even touches on it.
Well, it's questionable whether they even understand it or have any idea what's going on. But certainly, for those who do want to have an idea and do want to know what's going on, they should absolutely visit your Substack and follow your work. Alasdair, thanks so much of your time. I do look forward to doing this again at some point, perhaps in response to some of the things that you are predicting actually coming to pass. Thank you.
That's very much my pleasure, John. Thank you for having me.